The town of Maple Hollow was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and secrets never stayed buried for long. Nestled between rolling hills and maple-lined streets, the town moved at a pace slow enough to preserve tradition, and judgment quick enough to ruin a reputation. Emily Grace stood out the moment she chose to stay. At 27, Emily had already endured more than most. Just a year earlier, she'd lost her husband, Michael Rivers, in a tragic construction accident when scaffolding gave way at a downtown site. She had been teaching first grade then, living in a modest house on Willow Creek Road with Michael and his father, Walter Rivers, a Vietnam veteran who had lost his sight to a stroke 2 years prior. When Michael died, many assumed Emily would leave Maple Hollow and return to her family in Kentucky. Or at the very least, move out of the home she shared with her father-in-law and start fresh somewhere new. But Emily had made her decision, and it was one that left the town whispering. She stayed. More than that, she took over Michael's duties as caregiver to Walter. Every morning she would help him wash, feed him breakfast, and walk him around the front porch for fresh air. In the afternoons, she taught part-time at the local elementary school. In the evenings, she'd sit on the old wooden swing out front with Walter, describing the colors of the sunset he could no longer see. To Emily, it wasn't a sacrifice. It was love, loyalty. But to the people of Maple Hollow, it was something else entirely. "She's young beautiful," said Mrs. Durham at the Sunday bake sale, whispering behind a lemon pie. "Living with her blind father-in-law like that? It's unnatural." "I heard she gives him sponge baths," another woman added, shaking her head. "What young widow does that unless there's something more going on?" "She's just hanging around for that land," murmured old Mr. Caldwell, sipping coffee on the church steps. "You know Walter's got that whole parcel by the lake."
Chialellinritol.
It didn't take long for gossip to become gospel. Emily felt the change in the way people looked at her. Some stopped saying hello altogether. Others narrowed their eyes or offered brittle smiles. Children who once ran up to hug Miss Grace, now avoided her on the sidewalk. She became a ghost in the town she once called home. Still, she said nothing. One afternoon, after a particularly awkward encounter at the grocery store where the cashier had avoided eye contact and double-bagged her items with unnecessary haste, Emily returned home and sat on the front steps. Walter was asleep in his chair inside. The only sounds were birds in the trees and the faint rustle of wind through the maple branches. Her fingers curled into her skirt. She could feel her composure unraveling, thread by silent thread. "I'm not doing anything wrong," she whispered to no one. The air didn't answer. That night, a storm rolled in.
Thunder craquait across the sky, and rince la met down on the roof like a warning.
Emily was closing windows when she heard it, a sound so soft it was almost buried beneath the storm.
A baby's cry.
At first, she thought it was her imagination. Then it came again, louder this time, from outside. Grabbing a flashlight, she raced to the porch, peering into the dark. The wind whipped her hair across her face. She followed the sound down the steps, into the yard, and toward the front gate. There, tucked beneath the old maple tree, was a basket. She fell to her knees. Inside was a newborn, no older than a week, wrapped in a damp, pale blue blanket. The infant's tiny face was blotched red from crying, lips trembling with cold. "Oh my God," Emily breathed, pulling the baby into her arms, cradling him against her chest. The child smelled of rain and something older, fear, abandonment, desperation. She ran back into the house, drying the infant with towels, wrapping him in warmth, and trying to quiet his cries. Walter awoke to the commotion, his voice groggy and laced with confusion. "What is it, Emily?" She didn't answer at first. She was too busy heating formula, rocking, whispering. Finally, she said, "Someone left a baby. On our doorstep."
Walter sat up straighter.
"What?" She turned to face him, holding the tiny bundle. Her eyes were wild, disbelieving. He was just there.
In the rain.
For a long moment, Walter said nothing. Then he reached out, his fingers trembling slightly until they brushed the baby's tiny hand. "Poor thing," he murmured. Emily stayed up the rest of the night. She called the sheriff's office, reported the found child, and was told to wait until the morning when Child Protective Services could arrive. But something deep inside her had already shifted. As dawn broke over Maple Hollow, casting gold through the rain-soaked windows, she sat with the baby in the rocking chair, his breath soft against her chest. In the silence, she named him. Leo, she whispered.
Because you're brave.
She didn't know then how much braver she would have to become. Because when the town found out about the baby, they wouldn't just whisper anymore. They would rage. And she would be at the center of it all. The news traveled faster than the storm had rolled in. By mid-morning, even before Child Protective Services arrived at the River's home, Maple Hollow was already buzzing with the sound of scandal.
She found a baby in the rain. No note, no name, nothing.
Come on. You really believe that? At the corner cafe, two women leaned in over their coffee, voices lowered but pointed. Her husband's been dead a year, hasn't he?
Almost to the day. And now suddenly she's got a baby? I mean, how convenient. I'll tell you what it sounds like, damage control.
The town had a history of turning compassion into suspicion. In Maple Hollow, kindness that strayed beyond the expected was rarely applauded. It was questioned, dissected. By the time CPS officer Melody Parker pulled up in her county vehicle, a few curious neighbors were already peeking out from behind lace curtains. A couple lingered longer than necessary at their mailboxes, watching as Melody knocked on Emily's door. Emily answered with Leo in her arms. He's clean fed and warm, she said before the officer even stepped inside. He was soaked when I found him. I didn't know what else to do. Melody took one look at the baby, then at the woman holding him, and sighed. You did exactly what you should have done, she said softly. Over the next hour, Melody documented everything. She asked the necessary questions. Where exactly had Emily found the baby? What time? Any suspicious vehicles? Anyone she suspected?
Emily shook her head again and again.
No one, she said. It's like he appeared out of nowhere. Melody nodded, but her pen kept moving. We'll need to take him for medical evaluation.
Just à précaution.
And then, well, we'll have to place him in temporary foster care until a family member or legal guardian is identified. Emily's arms tightened instinctively. Does he have to go now? The question hung in the room, heavy and aching. Melody looked at her, eyes softening.
Let me talk to my supervisor.
Maybe we can arrange for him to stay here temporarily, just for a few days. But Emily, her voice dropped, quieter now. You should prepare yourself. It might not be up to you for long. Emily nodded, but something in her chest already refused. Leo didn't cry when Melody left. He fell asleep against Emily's shoulder, as if he belonged nowhere else. She held him until her arms were numb, then laid him gently in a woven basket lined with soft towels. It was the same basket he had arrived in, now transformed from abandonment into safety. Later that evening, Walter asked, Do they think someone from town left him here? I don't know, Emily replied, voice hollow. Maybe. Maybe someone thought I'd take care of him. You're not thinking of keeping him, Walter said, not as a judgment, but as a statement requiring clarity. Emily didn't answer right away. She looked out the window, where the maple tree still dripped with the last of the storm. The same tree under which Leo had been found. The same tree that shaded the porch where Michael once read books aloud in the summer. I don't think I have a choice, she said finally. He's already mine.
The first real trouble came 3 days later.
At the local grocery store, Emily walked in with Leo bundled against her chest. As she passed the produce section, she felt it, that unmistakable shift in atmosphere. People turned. Conversations stopped. A child whispered loudly, That's the baby lady. The cashier didn't greet her. The bagger looked away. As she handed over her money, a woman in line behind her leaned in close. Bit soon to be a mother again, isn't it? The voice was sugary, polite. But the intent was venomous. Emily didn't respond. She gathered her groceries and walked out with her chin held high, though her insides trembled. That night, she found an anonymous letter shoved under the front door. Whore.
We know the truth.
She burned the note in the kitchen sink before Walter could see it. But the poison had already seeped in. The next Sunday, Emily attended church as she always had, with Leo cradled in her arms and Walter walking at her side. They sat near the back, as was their custom. As hymns began, she noticed the pews around them remained noticeably empty. After the service, no one approached her. Not even the pastor, who'd once called her our blessed daughter of grace. When they returned home, Walter asked the question she had been avoiding. Are they saying the baby is mine? She stopped in the hallway, eyes wide. What? Walter's voice was quiet but steady. Don't pretend you haven't heard it. This town, it eats its wounded.
Tire stung Emilie's eyes.
That's disgusting. You're my family. He nodded. But that doesn't stop small minds. That night, someone spray-painted the words Sin House on their garage door. Emily spent the next morning scrubbing the red letters off with bleach and a broken heart. A few people walked by. No one offered help. That afternoon, Melody Parker returned with news. Emily, she said gently, I think we've found a lead.
There was a teenage girl, Samantha Keller.
Used to work as a housekeeper for the Claytons up by the lake. Emily remembered her. Barely.
A key girl, always looking down.
She went missing a few months ago, Melody continued. Turns out, she gave birth in secret. No hospital records, but there's a match in the infant DNA we tested.
Emilie s'en shook. Samantha est the mother.
Melody nodded grimly. And Emily, we found her.
In the woods.
She didn't make it.
The word shattered something inside her. Samantha. Seventine.
Alone. Dying in the cold while the town whispered about that widow and her father-in-law. Emily rocked Leo that night and wept. Your mother didn't leave you, she whispered. She saved you the only way she could.
Outside, the wind rustled through the maple tree.
And for the first time in days, Emily felt not just sadness but rage. They could talk. They could judge. But she knew the truth now. And the town of Maple Hollow wasn't ready for it. Emily didn't sleep much after Melody's visit.
The image of Samantha Keller, young, afraid, and dying alone in the woods, haunted her.
She thought of all the church services she'd sat through, the neighborhood potlucks, the PDA meetings, where everyone smiled and nodded and gossiped behind closed doors while a girl like Samantha slipped into the shadows unnoticed. She should have noticed. She should have said something, done something. But Maple Hollow had a way of making people look the other way. Of convincing them that some lives didn't need saving. And now a baby had been left in the rain. And a girl had died cold and forgotten. It was only a matter of time before Emily learned who Samantha had been running from. The answer came 2 days later, in the form of another knock at her door. It was Marcus Hale, a county investigator working with Child Services. Tall, brown-skinned, with sharp eyes and a gentleness to his voice, Marcus introduced himself quickly and asked to speak privately. Walter, ever protective, insisted on staying in the room. I'm here because we've confirmed that Samantha Keller was the biological mother of the child in your care, Marcus said, glancing down at Leo, who was asleep in a makeshift cradle by the fireplace. Emily nodded. I was told. I still want to keep him. He's safe here. Marcus looked at her with a long, assessing gaze.
I believe you.
That's not why I'm here. He pulled out a folder, slid a few documents onto the table. Hospital intake records, security camera stills, a death report with coordinates. Samantha's body had been found just a mile from the river's property. But there's more, Marcus continued. Through DNA testing, we've also identified the child's father.
Emily t'en said.
Who?
Marcus hesitated.
Then he said the name.
Ethan Clayton. The word landed with the weight of thunder.
Ethan Clayton, son of the wealthiest man in Maple Hollow.
The golden boy.
Handsome, articulate, heir to the family's real estate empire. He and Emily had gone to school together. He had always been charming in that curated dangerous way that made girls swoon and parents suspicious. Are you sure?
Emily whispered.
Marcus nodded. The DNA is conclusive. We also have testimonies, other girls who've hinted at being coerced, but never pressed charges. Samantha was one of them. She worked for the Claytons for 2 years before she disappeared. Emily stared at the fire, her jaw tightening. She got pregnant, she said aloud, more to herself than to anyone else. And instead of helping her, they threw her away. Marcus didn't answer. Walter spoke, voice like gravel. And now they'll throw away the child too.
Marcus shook his head.
Not if we move fast. But there's a complication. The Claytons have powerful lawyers. They've already denied everything. Claimed Samantha was mentally unstable, prone to making up stories. They'll say Leo isn't Ethan's? They already have. Emily felt heat crawl up her neck. Then we need to prove it. Not just legally. Publicly. Marcus smiled, faint but genuine.
That is why I came to you. I need someone who won't look away.
Someone who already knows what this town is capable of.
Emilie s'en curled into fist. I won't let them bury her again.
The next morning, Emily sat down with Walter and told him everything. He was silent for a long time, then asked a single question. What are you going to do? She looked at Leo, then out the window toward the distant Clayton estate, a pristine white mansion overlooking the lake like a crown over the town. I'm going to burn the masks, she said. That afternoon, she drove into town to the local paper, the Hollow Gazette. She had known the editor, Janice McKellen, for years. Janice had a reputation for walking the line between truth and safety. But Emily wasn't interested in safety anymore. I have a story, she told Janice. And evidence. At first, Janice was reluctant.
Emily, you know what kind of power the Clayton hold in this town.
I also know what happens when we let power go unchecked, Emily replied. A 17-year-old girl died. And no one lifted a finger. Janice's eyes softened. She motioned for Emily to sit.
Tell me everything.
Emily told her about the baby, about Samantha, about the DNA results. She showed copies of the reports Marcus had shared. She played the voicemail Samantha had left to a friend, never returned, but saved by accident. Her voice was barely audible, trembling, but clear enough to understand. He said no one would believe me. He said if I told, I'd regret it. The article ran 2 days later. Front page.
Burier Benéat Maple Leaf. The truth about Samantha Keller.
The town erupted. Some people defended the Claytons, calling it libel, accusing Emily of fabricating evidence to keep the child. But others, mothers, teachers, quiet citizens who had never spoken up, began to whisper a different story.
Stories of Ethan cornering girls behind the school gym.
Of hush money given to keep things quiet. Of young maids who left town suddenly, their reputations in tatters. And beneath all of it, the image of a baby boy left in the rain, wrapped in a blanket, saved by the woman no one trusted. The day after the article came out, Emily opened her front door to find a dozen letters shoved beneath the mat. Some were anonymous apologies. Some were confessions. One simply said, "We failed her." That evening, she stood in her backyard beneath the great maple tree. Leo slept soundly in a sling across her chest. The sky above was bruised with clouds, the kind that threatened thunder. But Emily didn't flinch. For the first time in months, she felt seen. Not perfectly. Not kindly. But truthfully. And that, she thought, would be enough. For now. The morning after the article's publication, Maple Hollow was silent, but not the silence of peace. It was the kind that curled beneath the skin, like a storm charging in the air, unseen but undeniable. People no longer whispered behind closed doors, they gawked openly, uncertain of what to believe. Emily became the center of every conversation. At the post office, at the church, at the diner. Her name spilled from lips with contempt, admiration, fear. She had peeled back the town's skin and revealed what festered beneath it. And the town, as expected, began to fight back. By noon, the Hollow Gazette received cease and desist letters from the Claytons' legal team. The local sheriff, long known for his loyalty to the family, visited Janice McKellen personally to remind her of the consequences of defamation. That same afternoon, Ethan Clayton made a public statement on the steps of City Hall. "I categorically deny all allegations made against me," he said, his tone composed but hollow. "These accusations are not only false, they are malicious attempts to damage the legacy of my family and our contributions to this community." Emily watched it on a grainy live stream from her kitchen, Leo asleep in her lap. The words felt rehearsed, bloodless.
There was no sorrow, no grief for a dead girl.
No concern for the child she left behind. Later that day, the threats began. At first, they were just phone calls.
Static, breathing, then silence. Then, a rock through the window.
Emily ducked instinctively as glass sprayed across the living room floor, shards glittering under the afternoon light like tiny weapons. She held Leo close, her heartbeat roaring in her ears. Walter rushed in with his cane, his face pale. We have to go to the police, he said. Emily stood still for a long moment, then shook her head. They already know. They've always known. That night, she didn't sleep. Instead, she sat on the porch with a bat resting across her knees, the baby monitor beside her. The maple tree swayed gently above, whispering in the wind. She waited, not for more violence, but for her fear to burn itself out. And it did. By morning, she felt steel in her spine. Melody Parker returned later that week, her expression tight. We've filed emergency motions, she said. If you want to formally adopt Leo, now is the time. Emily looked at her, unsure whether to be hopeful or terrified.
Will the Clayton fight it?
Yes, Melody said. But not because they want the baby. Because they want silence. Emily nodded slowly. Then I'll fight louder. Meanwhile, Marcus Hale was gathering testimony from other women, former employees, classmates, even a nurse from the regional hospital who remembered treating Samantha for minor injuries months before she vanished. None were willing to go public. Not yet. But cracks were forming. Then came the church meeting. Pastor Glenn Calloway called it under the pretense of community unity, but everyone knew what it was really about. The sanctuary was full that Wednesday evening. Wooden pews creaked beneath shifting bodies, and the murmurs before the opening prayer felt more like a jury assembling. Emily arrived with Walter and Leo. She could feel every eye on her, every whisper like a needle pricking her skin. Pastor Glenn began with soft words about healing, forgiveness, and the danger of division. Then carefully, he steered toward the topic at hand. We are a town of values, he said. Of decency. And though some may seek to stir unrest, we must ask ourselves, what is truth? And who profits from stirring scandal? Emily stood. She didn't wait for permission. I don't profit from this, she said. Her voice didn't shake.
I lost everything. My husband.
My career. My peace. I didn't ask to find that child under my tree. But I thank God I did.
A rustle spread across the room.
I didn't stir scandal. I spoke truth.
Samantha Keller was 17.
She was raped. She was silenced. And then she was buried in the woods while this town pretended not to notice. Emily, Pastor Glenn interjected, voice cautious, we don't have proof. We have DNA, she snapped. We have a voicemail. We have her body.
Silence. Appel signe, brutal silence.
She looked around the room, scanning faces. Some turned away. Others met her gaze, ashamed. Leo is here because his mother was brave enough to try and protect him. And I will not let her courage go unanswered. I will not let him grow up in a town that treats truth like poison. Pastor Glenn adjusted his collar. The Lord teaches us about redemption.
About restraint.
And what about justice? Emily asked. Where was the Lord when Samantha begged for help? No one answered. That night, she walked home under a sky filled with stars. It was the first time she felt proud of her voice. Not because it had been heard, but because she had spoken it anyway. The next day, someone left a bouquet of wildflowers on her porch. There was no note. Then one by one, people started knocking. A mother whose daughter once worked for the Claytons. A retired teacher who remembered how Ethan always stayed a little too close to the girls after class. A nurse who swore Samantha came to her twice, bruised and frightened. Stories. Whispers. Truth. Marcus recorded them all. And when the case went to court for Leo's custody, it wasn't just Emily and her lawyer standing there. There were witnesses. There were voices. And when Ethan Clayton was called to testify, his charm cracked for the first time. He stammered. Avoided eye contact. Fumbled over timelines. Under pressure, he contradicted himself. Emily never looked away. Leo's adoption was granted. Permanently. The courtroom didn't erupt in cheers. There was no fanfare. Just a judge's steady voice, a gavel, and a mother holding her son while her hands trembled in relief.
That evening, as the sun sank behind the hills, Emily stood beneath the maple tree mort.
Walter sat nearby, humming an old hymn. Leo slept soundly in her arms. And Emily whispered into the breeze, "You're safe now." The wind answered in rustling leaves, and for once, the town of Maple Hollow seemed to hold its breath, not in suspicion but in silence. Not in judgment, but in awe. It should have ended there. The court ruling had been clear. Leo was Emily's son now, legally, permanently. The truth about Samantha had been spoken, and though the Claytons hadn't faced formal charges yet, their empire was beginning to crack. The newspaper published a second exposé. Donors pulled out of town projects sponsored by the Clayton estate. For the first time, their name felt more like a stain than a shield. Emily thought that maybe, just maybe, the storm had passed. But Maple Hollow didn't forget, not truly. And it certainly didn't forgive quickly. It began again, subtly. A grocery clerk bagged her bread too roughly. A neighbor who used to wave now turned and walked the other way. Church pews still sat empty beside her on Sundays. The town had lost its ability to attack her with whispers, so instead it cut with silence. Even worse, some began to blame her for the town's discomfort. If she just kept quiet. If she hadn't dragged everyone through the mud. If she didn't want attention, she wouldn't have adopted the baby in the first place. Emily learned to navigate this new kind of hostility with practiced grace. She kept her head down, taught her students, and raised Leo with fierce tenderness. Walter, who grew frilier each passing day, remained her anchor. You can't fix all of them, he told her one night, coughing between words. But you saved the one that mattered most. Leo? She asked, tucking a blanket around him.
No, Walter said, eyes misty.
You. The next week, Walter's heart gave out quietly in the early morning hours. Emily found him still in his chair, his fingers resting on the arms like he was merely dozing. The house was too quiet after that. Leo, sensing the shift, became clingier. He wouldn't fall asleep unless pressed against Emily's chest. She wore Walter's dog tags beneath her shirt for weeks afterward. It was the only way to carry his presence forward. The town offered a small funeral.
No eulogie from pastor hors official.
No fanfare. Just Emily, Leo, and a handful of old veterans who stood in salute while taps echoed into the valley. Later that evening, Emily returned home to find her front porch vandalized again. This time, it wasn't spray paint. A dead raccoon had been nailed to her door. A piece of paper was stapled to its fur, crudely written in red marker. You'll bring death to all of us. Emily didn't scream. She didn't call the sheriff. She simply removed the body, scrubbed the wood clean, and sat by the window until dawn with a kitchen knife on the table beside her. Marcus Hale visited the next day. He hadn't been by since the trial, too buried in other cases, but the dark circles under his eyes told her he'd heard. You need protection, he said. Witnesses have been backing out. People are scared. Emily nodded. I'm scared too. But you won't run. No. He sat across from her, looked around the old house.
You ever think about leaving?
She hesitated. Every day. But if I do, they win.
Samantha disappear again.
Leo becomes that baby again. Walter's memory gets turned into something shameful. Marcus smiled, tired but admiring.
You're not just raising a kid, Emily. You're raising the truth.
It was meant as comfort. Instead, it became a curse. 2 nights later, the fire came.
Emily woke to the sound of Leo crying and the sharp scent of smoke.
She ran barefoot into the hallway, heart pounding. The kitchen was already in flames. Heat blistered the air.
Wood cracked. Glass shattered.
She grabbed Leo, a blanket, her phone. She ran for the back door, but the flames were too fast. She turned, shielding Leo, screaming Walter's name though she knew he wasn't there.
A voice broke through the roar.
Emily. It was Marcus. He was at the front, bashing through the door with a metal rod. Smoke poured into the living room, but he didn't hesitate. She ran to him, pushing Leo into his arms, coughing as blackness crept into her lungs. Then she was outside. She didn't remember falling to the ground. Or how she started crying. But she remembered the orange glow, the way it swallowed the roof, the way the maple tree caught last, its leaves igniting like match tips. It burned to the ground in less than an hour. The fire marshal ruled it arson. No suspects. No arrests. The town said little. Some dropped off casseroles. Others avoided her eyes.
No one confessed.
She moved into a temporary rental on the edge of town. The owner, a widow herself, charged nothing for the first month. Emily thanked her quietly and spent the next days trying to piece together what came next. Leo had night terrors. She stopped sleeping again. But she didn't break.
She planted a maple sapling behind the new house.
Leo helped her dig the hole, his tiny hands covered in soil. When they finished, she whispered to the earth, "For what we lost. For what we're growing." The town's silence deepened. Some said she'd asked for it, that her stubbornness brought ruin. But others began to see her differently, not as a scandal, but as a survivor. A local reporter reached out. So did a regional women's justice organization. And one day, while picking up groceries, a young girl, no older than 15, brushed past her and slipped a note into her pocket. "Thank you for not being quiet." That night, Emily tucked Leo into bed, lit a candle beside the photo of Walter and Michael, and opened her laptop. She began to write.
Not just the story of Samantha. Not just the story of the fire.
But her own. A story not about being wronged, but about standing anyway. Because sometimes, surviving wasn't enough. Sometimes, you had to tell the world why you did. Weeks passed after the fire. The air still carried the scent of smoke if Emily thought hard enough, though the new house was miles away from the ashes of the old one. Grief clung to her like a shawl, not heavy enough to stop her, but present in every step, every breath. Walter's dog tags now hung by the front door, next to Leo's finger-painted picture of a house under a bright sun. Emily had not spoken publicly since the fire. Reporters knocked. Letters arrived. She ignored them all. She needed silence not to hide, but to rebuild. Some ruins you sweep away with a broom. Others must be excavated, slowly, with hands that still remember the burn. It was Leo's 4th birthday when everything shifted again. She hadn't planned a party. Just a quiet cake, a small candle, and a handmade card that said, "You are brave.
You are loved. You are home."
But when she opened the front door that morning, she found something unexpected, a crowd.
Not of protester.
Not of reporters. People. Neighbors. Some she recognized. Others she didn't. A few held signs, not hateful ones this time, but quiet ones.
Oui, remember Samantha.
Thank you for Leo.
M'appelle Olo quand il. Emily froze.
Leo peeked out from behind her legs, wide-eyed. From the center of the group, a woman stepped forward. It was Janice McKellen, the editor who had first printed Emily's story. "We're not here to hurt you," Janice said. "We're here to listen. And maybe if you're willing to help." Emily didn't respond at first. Her throat clenched. Her fingers dug into the doorframe. Behind her, Leo whispered, "Can they come to my party?"
The crowd chuckled softly.
And something inside her cracked open, not broken but unfurled. She nodded. "Yes," she said. "But only if someone brought candles."
I forgot them.
By afternoon, the backyard was full. Someone had brought balloons. Someone else brought a cooler of lemonade. A man Emily had never seen before tuned a guitar and played softly under the tree where the new maple sapling had been planted. It wasn't redemption. But it was real. Marcus Hale arrived later, holding a box under one arm. Inside were framed copies of the original articles, a photo of Samantha at age 15 bright-eyed unsure, and a copy of the adoption certificate for Leo. "I thought you should have the full story," he said. Emily looked down at the documents, the timeline of all they had survived. "Will the Claytons face any real charges?" she asked.
Marcus hesitated.
"They're being investigated. But you know how deep their pockets go. We may never see the justice we want." Emily nodded slowly. "But at least now people know." Marcus gestured to the yard. "And they're choosing to believe." That night, after the guests had gone and Leo had fallen asleep with frosting still on his cheeks, Emily sat beneath the sapling alone.
The star shimmered above, impossibly distant.
But the air was warm.
And the earth's benedicteur felt steady.
She began to write again. Not the memoir, not yet.
Something simple. A children's story.
She called it The Girl Who Planted Fire. It was about a girl who lived in a town of cold smiles, who discovered a secret, and who spoke it aloud, even when the trees burned and the sky screamed. The girl didn't run. She built a garden from ashes and taught others to dig. As the words flowed, Emily found that she wasn't writing for herself. She was writing for Leo.
For Samantha.
For every girl whose voice had been buried before it could bloom. 2 months later, a publishing house in Chicago reached out. They'd read her blog, the short pieces she'd posted anonymously online. They wanted to see more.
Emily sans the story.
Then forgot about it. She didn't tell anyone, not even Marcus, who still visited weekly, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with laughter. Life had found rhythm again. Leo started preschool. Emily returned to teaching part-time, then full-time.
The star faded.
The letters slowed. Some people still crossed the street when they saw her, but others waved.
The sapling grew allé. And one day, a letter came in the mail.
A contract. An offer. They wanted to publish The Girl Who Planted Fire, and more, if she had it in her. She stared at the letter for a long time before calling Marcus. "You think this matters?" she asked.
Elogued softly.
"You gave this town its voice back.
Now give it to the rest of the world."
She signed the contract that night. Leo sat beside her, coloring. "Is that your teacher paper?" he asked.
No, Emily said, smiling.
"It's a story paper. About me.
About someone like you.
Brave.
Qu'un. Unstoppable."
He leaned his head against her shoulder. "Then it's about you too." Her heart ached in the best way. That fall, she returned to the ruins of the old house. The land had been cleared. Only the stone steps remained, leading to nothing. She placed a bench at the edge of the clearing.
Bésidit, à plaque. For Walter and Michael Rivers. For Samantha Keller.
And for every voice that was told to stay silent. The wind moved through the trees, rustling the leaves of nearby maples. Emily sat on the bench, alone but never lonely. She had planted truth. And truth, like trees, always reached for the light. The first time Emily stood on a stage to read her book, it was in a modest library auditorium in Lexington, Kentucky. 100 folding chairs were set up in neat rows, most of them filled by librarians, young parents, teachers, and a few curious locals who had seen her name in the newspaper headlines months ago.
The Sign Outsidrid. Author reading, Emily Grace, The Girl Who Planted Fire.
She had rehearsed her speech, even practiced reading aloud in front of the mirror, but when the spotlight found her and the hush fell over the room, her breath caught. She looked down at the copy in her hands, fingers trembling slightly. Then she found Leo's drawing inside the front cover. It was a small sketch of a tree, growing from a crack in the earth. Above it, he'd scrawled in crayon, "This is Mommy's story. She makes things grow." She smiled. And began to read. Her voice wasn't theatrical or loud, but it was clear, steady. When she reached the part about the fire, about how the girl refused to run even as flames swallowed everything, there was a pause in the room.
A collective brisselt.
When she finished, no one clapped at first. They just sat there, blinking, absorbing. Then a single hand started to applaud. It spread slowly, until the entire room echoed with the sound.
Réal, honest applause. No charity in it.
Afterward, people lined up to speak to her. A mother whose daughter had been bullied. A teacher who had lost her job for defending a student. A young woman who said she had never heard anyone speak so directly to the hurt she carried. Then, at the end of the line, stood a girl with short-cropped hair and tired eyes. She looked no older than 17. She didn't speak at first. Just handed Emily a folded piece of paper and walked away. Later, in the quiet of her hotel room, Emily opened it. "He said no one would believe me either. Now I know that's a lie. Thank you." She cried for a long time.
Not out of sadness. Out of recognition.
The tour continued. Small towns.
Bookstore. Coffee shops.
The same pattern repeated, curiosity, hesitancy, then connection. The book became more than a story. It became a symbol, a spark. But not everyone embraced the flame. One morning, she opened her email to find a message from the Maple Hollow Town Council.
To Emily Grace.
Subject: Property Concerns and Memorial Bench. It was stiff, formal, full of bureaucratic language. But the message was clear. Her bench and plaque, placed on the remains of her old home, were deemed unauthorized structures on undeveloped municipal land. They would be removed within 30 days unless she filed for a public hearing and presented justification for the display. She read it twice. Then again. It wasn't about benches. It was about erasure. A quiet attempt to undo the memory she had planted. She forwarded the message to Marcus. He called within minutes. They really don't stop, do they? They're hoping people have forgotten, she said. That enough time has passed. Do you want to fight it? He asked. She didn't answer right away. That afternoon, she packed Leo into the car and drove to Maple Hollow. The town hadn't changed much. The same corner diner. The same post office with its hand-painted sign. But now, when she parked and stepped onto the sidewalk, people looked her in the eye. Some nodded. Some crossed the street. But no one pretended she didn't exist. She brought Leo to the school playground. Watched him climb and tumble and laugh with kids who had never heard the word scandal. Their parents watched too, some with curiosity, others with guarded warmth. Later, she walked with Leo to the plot of land where her house had once stood. The bench was still there. So was the plaque.
Léo knelt beside the sapling, touching the trunk.
Is this tree big enough to climb yet? He asked. Not yet, she said. But someday. Like me. Exactly. She turned and looked at the sky above the town. Then pulled out her phone and took a picture of the bench, the tree, and Leo's small hand pressed against the bark. That evening, she uploaded the photo with a caption. They tried to burn it down.
Oui, planted again. Tirtides to fight?
We'll take 3. The post went viral. Readers from across the country flooded the Maple Hollow Council's inbox. Letters poured in, from teachers, from survivors, from parents. Hashtags bloomed. Donations arrived to preserve the land as a memorial. The town hadn't expected resistance. It had certainly not expected national attention. Under pressure, the council relented. The bench stayed. Emily returned home a few days later to find a package on her porch.
No return address.
Inside was a frame. A photo of Walter, sitting in his chair on that same bench months earlier, Leo in his lap, Emily beside him. Someone had taken it from the road, unnoticed. Beneath the photo, in handwriting she didn't recognize, was a note. Some roots are deeper than fire. Thank you for showing us where to begin again. She hung it above her writing desk. That night, she sat by the window while Leo slept. She opened her journal, not to write a story, but to record something smaller. A thought. A memory.
The beginning of something new.
She didn't know yet what her next book would be. But she knew one thing. It wouldn't be about endings. It would be about the ground you stand on when everything else is ash. And the child who climbs the tree that grew from it. Autumn in the mountains of Kentucky brought a kind of silence that felt holy. The air turned crisp, the trees blazed in crimson and amber, and for a few brief weeks, the world looked like it had been painted by hand. Emily stood at the window of her modest rental home, watching Leo chase leaves across the lawn, his laughter rising like wind chimes in a breeze. The maple sapling in the backyard had grown taller, its branches now holding onto the season's fire-red leaves like memories refusing to fall. It had been nearly a year since the fire. A year since Walter passed. A year since Maple Hollow tried to remove her bench. And though wounds still ached beneath the surface, Emily had found a kind of peace, not the stillness of forgetting, but the quiet strength of remembering without breaking. Her second book was already with the publisher. This one was different. It wasn't a fable or allegory, but a collection of stories, real voices, real names, gathered from survivors across the state who, inspired by Emily's courage, had come forward to share their own. Teachers. Teenagers. Nurses. Church volunteers. Even a retired policewoman who confessed she'd once ignored Samantha Keller's plea for help and had lived with the regret ever since. The manuscript was titled What We Carried in Silence. It was due for release in spring. And while Emily had been prepared for the weight of telling their stories, she hadn't anticipated the quiet, relentless question that kept whispering in her own head.
What about Leo?
She hadn't told him much about his birth mother yet. Only that she had loved him. That she had done something very brave. But he was getting older now, asking more questions, picking up on tones in conversations, noticing the way some people still flinched at his name. One evening, while Emily prepared dinner, Leo sat at the table, drawing. "Mom?" he asked. She turned, hands still damp from washing vegetables.
Yeah, baby.
He held up his picture. It was of a girl standing under a burning tree, holding a baby in her arms. Was I in a fire?
Emily froze.
Then walked slowly toward him. No, she said softly, sitting beside him. You were left under a tree, but it wasn't on fire. That came later. Was it scary? For me, yes. But you were safe. I made sure of that. Leo nodded slowly, then asked the question she'd been both dreading and waiting for. Did I come from your belly? Her throat tightened. She leaned down, gently brushing his hair behind his ear.
No, sweetheart.
You didn't grow in my belly. But you grew in my heart. That's where you really come from. He seemed to think about that for a long moment. Did someone else grow me in their belly? Yes, she said. Her name was Samantha. Where is she now? Emily looked out the window, at the tree, at the sky beyond it.
She's not here anymore.
But she loved you very much. She wanted you to be safe. That's why she brought you to me. Leo nodded again. Then whispered, Thank you, Samantha. Emily didn't try to stop her tears. That night, after Leo went to sleep, she pulled out the photo album she'd been building quietly for years. Inside were clippings of articles, court records, handwritten notes from women she'd met, and the only known photo of Samantha Keller, taken on her 16th birthday, standing beside a cake with uncertain eyes and the smallest of smiles. She added Leo's drawing beside it. Then closed the book. There were other changes too. Janice McKellen had reached out with a proposal to create a literacy center in Maple Hollow named after Walter Rivers. A place for veterans, single mothers, and children to learn, gather, and heal. They wouldn't have to know it was your idea, Janice said carefully. But I think they'd come, if it had your name attached. Quietly, at first. Then maybe more. Emily agreed. The Rivers Literacy Room opened in January. It occupied a corner of the old post office, now renovated with warm lighting, used books, donated laptops, and a children's corner painted with murals of trees and stars. Emily didn't run the place. But she visited. Sometimes to read. Sometimes to listen. Sometimes just to sit in the silence of what used to be resistance, now turned into something softer. There was still tension in town. The Claytons had moved out of state, their estate put up for sale. The rumors of lawsuits faded into background noise. But new names appeared in local leadership, young people, often women, who carried quiet fires of their own. At the spring festival, Emily stood in a booth for local authors. A young girl approached, barely 10, with freckles and thick glasses. My teacher read your book to our class, she said shyly. The one about the fire girl. Emily smiled.
Did you like it?
The girl nodded.
You wanna write too.
About my mom. She's sick, but she says stories make pain smaller.
Emily bent down. She's right.
Stories don't erase the pain, but they give it shape. And when pain has shape, we can carry it better. The girl handed her a slip of paper. It had a drawing of a heart with little legs.
This is what I carry, she said.
Emily tucked it into her notebook.
Another seed. Another sapling.
Another quiet flame passed hand to hand. That evening, at home, Leo helped her water the maple tree. Will it be big enough to climb by my next birthday? He asked. Maybe not, Emily said. But someday. He looked up at her.
Will you climb it with me?
She smiled. I'll always be close enough to catch you if you fall. He nodded. Then whispered, I'm not scared of falling anymore. Emily looked at the tree. At its growing roots. At the soil beneath it, richer because of what had burned. The quiet season was ending. And spring was coming. By late spring, the maple sapling had grown strong enough to sway with the wind instead of bowing to it. Its leaves had thickened, darkened, a sign of deep roots and a season well endured. Emily stood beside it one morning, barefoot in the cool grass, sipping coffee as Leo played with his toy truck near the flower beds. The morning light spilled over everything, fences, fields, and porch steps, as if trying to prove that hope was something you could feel, not just imagine. Inside the house, a letter waited on her desk. Not email.
Note à message.
A real letter, postmarked from Lexington. The return address was from the Department of Social Services. Emily had hesitated to open it for days, sensing it carried something more than bureaucratic updates or procedural follow-ups. That morning, she finally sat at her desk, inhaled deeply, and unfolded the pages.
The letter was brief. Formal.
But at the bottom, in handwriting rather than type, was a note.
Dear Miss Grace,
We've located Samantha Keller's father. He has expressed a desire to meet you. We have not informed him of Leo's exact whereabouts or the extent of your involvement. Would you like us to arrange a meeting? Emily stared at the paper. Samantha had once said she had no one. But she hadn't been born from no one. There had always been someone.
Aman Ahmed Dalkeller.
She searched his name online and found little: an address in Tennessee, a work history in auto repair, a divorce finalized just a few years before Samantha died. No articles. No photos.
Just a name and now, a request.
She let the letter sit for a full week. Then she wrote back. Yes. I'd like to meet. The meeting was arranged in a neutral space, a quiet room at the Lexington Community Center where Emily had spoken before. It smelled of dust and old books. The walls were lined with faded posters about parenting support groups and addiction recovery resources. She arrived early. Leo stayed at home with Marcus. She didn't know what to expect. Anger? Guilt? Denial? But when Dale Keller walked through the door, he looked like none of those things. Just a tired man in his late 50s, his flannel shirt tucked into worn jeans, eyes bloodshot not from drink but from something harder: regret. He took off his hat as he sat. Thank you for coming, he said. Emily nodded, unsure whether she should speak first. I didn't know, he said before she could. Not about Samantha being pregnant. Not even that she was missing until months after. Her mother kept us apart. Emily listened. She said I was the reason Samantha was troubled, Dale continued. That I was a bad influence. So I stayed away, like the courts told me. I figured she'd reach out when she was ready. I didn't know she was gone until I read it in some online forum. Someone posted about the trial. He looked up, eyes brimming. That's when I learned about the baby. About you. Emily finally spoke. She wasn't troubled. She was scared. And strong. She gave birth alone and left her son on my doorstep in the rain to save his life. Dale wiped at his face. I want to help, he said. Not to take him. God knows I don't deserve that. But if he ever asks if he wants to know where he came from, I don't want to be another blank space. Emily studied him. She didn't trust easily anymore. But she had also learned to recognize when someone was trying to rebuild something they'd broken. You can write him letters, she said. When he's old enough, I'll read them to him. If he wants to meet you one day, that will be his choice. Dale nodded, swallowing hard. They sat in silence for a few moments. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a photograph. It was creased, weather-worn. A teenage Samantha, maybe 12 or 13, smiling as she held a dog in her lap. She named him Dusty, Dale said. She wanted to be a vet back then. Emily took the photo gently. She was a good mother, she said. Even for the few moments she had. When she returned home, Leo was asleep on the couch, Marcus reading beside him.
How did it go?
Marcus asked. Emily handed him the photo. That's her father.
Marcus studiait it for a moment.
Is he going to be in Leo's life? Emily nodded. In his own way. That night, Emily added the photo of Samantha and Dusty to the memory album. Then she pulled out a blank page and began a new section, labeled in Leo's scrawling letters. Where I come from. It wasn't just genetics or court papers or news articles. It was stories, names, memories, woven together with care. Something Leo could hold when questions came. 2 weeks later, Leo asked his next one. They were on the porch, watching the stars. Mom, he said.
When he grow up, will y avoir tout.
You already do, she replied. But mine's still small. She smiled.
It'll grow with you.
He thought for a moment. Can I plant one for her? For who?
For Samantha.
Emily's throat tightened. Of course, she said. That would be beautiful. They planted it the next morning. A second maple, beside the first. Leo insisted on doing most of the digging himself, even though the shovel was nearly his height. When they finished, he patted the dirt gently and said, "I hope you like the sun here." Emily stood beside him, hand resting on his shoulder. She would have, she whispered. Spring continued. And the trees kept growing. By the time Leo turned 6, the 2 maple trees in the backyard had begun to braid their branches. Not literally, of course. Trees didn't twist and tangle like storybook vines. But their shadows had begun to overlap in the midday sun, and that was enough for Leo. He called them the sisters. "The tall one is you," he said one morning, pointing to the older tree.
"And the little one is Samantha."
Emily crouched beside him, adjusting the scarf around his neck. "Why are we trees?" "Because we stay," he said, "even in the cold." She didn't answer, but kissed the top of his head and looked up at the trees, letting his words plant themselves somewhere quiet in her chest. The world outside Maple Hollow had changed too. Her second book, What We Carried in Silence, had become a quiet success. Not a bestseller in the traditional sense, but passed hand to hand among counselors, teachers, young women, survivors. It had been translated into 3 languages and excerpted in college classrooms. Emily had received letters from across the country, and beyond. Some were long, detailing traumas buried under decades of silence. Others were just a single sentence. "You helped me name it." She never responded with advice. Just gratitude. And once, to a teenage girl in Seoul, she wrote, "Your voice is not weak because it trembles. It is strong because it keeps going." In town, Emily had begun to lead writing workshops at the Rivers Literacy Room. The space had grown, now occupying the entire first floor of the renovated post office. Teenagers came in after school.
Moder came in the evening.
One man, nearly 70, asked for help writing his first email. Emily taught them all. Not just how to spell or structure a sentence, but how to speak when their words had been dismissed for so long. She gave them paper and pens and silence that was safe, not suffocating. Sometimes she let Leo sit in the corner and draw. He had started his own notebook now, filled with stick figures and stories of birds that built homes in broken trees. One night, as she tucked him in, he asked,
"Do you think Samantha read my stories from the sky?"
"I think," Emily said, smoothing his blanket, "she never misses a word." He smiled, then turned on his side and whispered, "Good night, Mama Tree." And somehow, the ache in her chest softened.
One evening in late summer, a call came from Dalkeller.
"I'm driving through," he said.
Could he leave something for Leo?"
Emily agreed. He arrived the next morning, a little thinner, a little grayer. He didn't ask to come in. Just handed her a small wooden box. "I built it myself," he said, clearing his throat. "It's not much." Inside was a collection of letters. Each sealed, each labeled with a future age, age 10, age 13, age 18. And at the very top, a single envelope marked, "When he wants to know everything." Emily stared at it for a long time, then looked up. "He'll appreciate this." Dale looked toward the trees in the yard. "She would have too," he said, voice breaking slightly. "She just wanted him to be seen." "You're helping with that," Emily said gently. He nodded, turned to go, then stopped. "I don't want to take anything from you," he said. "But if he ever wants more, I hope there's space." Emily hesitated. "There's always space," she said. "But the pace? That's his." He smiled once, then left without another word. That evening, she tucked the box into the chest where she kept Leo's baby things. The blanket he'd been found in. A photo of the house before it burned. The newspaper clipping of her first reading.
And now, the sealed letters from the man who had learned, to let, how to hold on.
Time passed. Seasons shifted.
The trees grew.
On the anniversary of the fire, Emily walked with Leo to the clearing where their old house had stood. The bench remained, weathered now. The plaque still glinted in the sun, stubborn against time. They brought wildflowers. Leo placed his bouquet on the bench, then sat cross-legged in the grass, looking at the empty space where a kitchen once stood, where a life once unraveled. "Do you miss it?" he asked. "The house?" she replied. He nodded. "Sometimes," she said. "But we brought the most important pieces with us." He smiled. "Me?"
She looked softly.
"You?"
End stories.
And roots. They sat there for a while, the wind sifting through the grass. Emily looked toward the horizon and felt something shift. Not closure, she didn't believe in it, but a kind of settling. Like dust finally drifting to ground. Like breath after weeping. That night, she wrote again. Not for a book. Just for herself. A letter. To the girl who was left behind.
You were never forgotten.
You were not the silence, they were. You were not the shame, they carried it.
You were not a shadow.
You were the beginning of something that still grows, still learns, still blooms.
You were fire.
And from fire, we planted.
You were love.
And through love, we stayed. You were voice. And I heard you.
You always will. With everything.
Emily. Outside, the wind passed through the trees, no longer trying to bend them, just brushing their leaves like a whisper. And under the maple branches, the world held its breath for no one. Because now, it had learned to listen.